The sun hung low over the distant hills, casting long golden rays over the Khiamniungan village, where the dense forests whispered secrets carried by the wind. The people of the land lived by ancient laws, their traditions as unyielding as the mountains that surrounded them. It was here, in this sacred land, that Lao and King's fates intertwined, drawn together by a love deemed forbidden. Lao was a warrior of great renown, his presence commanding respect among his people. His days were spent hunting, training, and proving his strength in battles that ensured the village's safety. Though fierce in combat, there was a quiet gentleness within him, a part of his soul that only the wind and the river seemed to understand. His heart found solace in the untamed beauty of nature, but it was not the forest or the river that captured his spirit. It was King. King, daughter of the chieftain, carried herself with a quiet grace. She was the pride of her clan, the one whose wisdom was whispered about in admiration. The village women envied her beauty, while warriors sought her favor. Yet, despite the admiration, her heart was untouched by those who sought her hand. She yearned for something beyond the expectations placed upon her, a love not dictated by the elders, but one that ignited her soul. Their paths first crossed during the harvest festival, when the village erupted in celebration. Drums echoed through the air, and fires blazed high as warriors demonstrated their prowess. The people danced in unison, their feet pounding against the earth like a heartbeat shared by all. It was in this moment, amid the revelry, that Lao saw King. She stood adorned in the finest woven garments, her ornaments catching the fire's glow. But it was her eyes that held him captive, dark and deep like the river at night, filled with something he could not yet name. When their gazes met, something passed between them, an understanding, a silent acknowledgement of something neither had known before. From that night, they sought moments stolen from time itself. They met by the river under the moon's watchful eye, speaking in hushed tones of dreams and forbidden hopes. The world around them faded whenever they were together, as if the universe conspired to give them these fleeting moments of bliss. King found in Lao a heart that beat in rhythm with hers, and Lao, who had once known only duty, discovered a reason to dream beyond war and honor. Yet, love was not meant to bloom between them. The laws of their people were unyielding, clans did not mix, and love across forbidden lines was met with punishment severe enough to etch sorrow into the very bones of the land. King's father, a leader whose word shaped the village's fate, would never allow such a bond to exist. Lao knew this. King knew this. But love, once awakened, does not bow to reason. One evening, as they stood beneath the towering trees, the weight of reality pressed upon them. The river murmured beside them, its flow relentless, mirroring the pull they felt toward each other. "We cannot keep meeting like this," King whispered, though she did not step away. Lao's jaw tightened, his fingers curling into fists. "I would fight for you, no matter the cost." She smiled, though sorrow darkened her gaze. "And if the cost is your life?" Silence stretched between them. They both knew the truth. No battle of swords or strength could change the fate imposed by their people. Their love was a defiance of laws older than the stones beneath their feet. Despite the looming threat, they continued to meet, their love defying reason itself. But no secret remains hidden forever. Whispers began to spread through the village like fire catching dry grass. Eyes followed their every move, and soon the watchful gaze of the elders fell upon them. It was King's father who first called for action. Summoning the council, he spoke of dishonor, of laws defiled by reckless youth. The elders nodded in solemn agreement. Such love could not be allowed to exist. For if one rule was broken, what would stop others from doing the same? Order must be upheld. Lao's family, though proud of his strength, understood the danger. His father, a man who had once stood against warriors thrice his number, now looked at his son with a fear he could not voice. "You must let this go," he urged. "You do not understand the wrath of the council." But Lao did understand. He understood that to love King was to walk a path without return. And yet, The thought of losing her was an agony worse than death itself. King's father did not wait for fate to decide. He arranged her marriage to a warrior of their clan, a man chosen for his lineage, his strength, his ability to uphold tradition. The ceremony was set, the preparations began, and with each passing day, the walls between Lao and King grew higher, built by hands that sought to keep them apart. On the eve of the wedding, King sat alone, staring at the moon that had once been their silent witness. In the shadows, a figure emerged. Lao, breathless, eyes burning with urgency. "Come with me," he pleaded. "We can leave this place, find a land where no one will tell us our love is a crime." Her heart ached with the impossible choice before her. To stay was to surrender. To leave was to abandon all she had ever known. But love had already made its claim upon her soul. She took his hand, but fate was not kind to lovers who defied the will of the elders. Before they could take a single step beyond the village's reach, the night erupted with the cries of warriors. They had been discovered. Lao drew his blade, ready to fight, but King's voice stopped him. "No," she whispered. "Not like this." The warriors surrounded them, torches casting flickering shadows upon their faces. King's father stood at the front, his expression unreadable, but his voice was as unshaken as the laws he upheld. "You have shamed this village," he declared. "You will answer for what you have done." Lao did not resist as they seized him. King did not beg as they pulled her away. Some battles could not be fought with swords, and as they were torn apart, they knew their love had become a war against destiny itself. The night was thick with silence, the kind that carried the weight of unspoken sentences, of love lost in the web of fate. The village had spoken. The elders had decided. Lao, in King's love, was not merely forbidden, it was condemned. Lao knelt in the center of the village, his wrists bound with woven rope, his face illuminated by the torches surrounding him. Shadows danced across his sharp features, but his eyes held steady. He would not beg. He would not plead. He would meet his fate with the same unwavering strength that had made him a warrior. King stood a few feet away, her hands trembling at her sides, her heart fighting against the constraints placed upon her. The faces around them were impassive, carved from stone, their judgment absolute. Her father stood before them, a pillar of tradition, a man whose word was law. "You have dishonored your clan," he said, his voice a slow rumble, a gathering storm. "You have defied the order that keeps our people strong." Lao did not flinch. "I have only followed my heart. A heart that seeks to break the laws of our ancestors is a heart unworthy of beating." King's breath caught, her nails digging into her palms. "Father, please." His gaze flickered toward her, sharp as a blade. "You will not speak. You are to be wed in the morning. This ends tonight." She felt the ground tilt beneath her. Morning, a word so simple, yet now laced with cruelty. Morning would come, and with it, a life she would not choose, while the only man she had ever loved would not live to see the sun rise. The warriors moved toward Lao, lifting him to his feet. The judgment had been passed. Banishment was too lenient, and to let him live would be to invite defiance among others. The only sentence was death. As they dragged him toward the edge of the village, toward the place where the river met the cliffs, King found her voice. "No," she cried, stepping forward. "This is not justice." Her father did not look at her. "Justice is preserving what has kept us strong. You are young, and you do not understand. One love cannot stand above the laws that have protected us for generations." She turned to the villagers, to the faces she had known since childhood. And what of love? What of choice? No one answered. The night swallowed them whole as Lao was taken beyond the village, his fate sealed. But the winds carried voices, whispers of another plan, one that had been woven in hushed urgency. Deep in the night, a shadow moved through the village, silent as the wind that rustled the trees. A handmaiden slipped into King's chamber, her breath uneven, her eyes filled with unspoken words. "They will take him to the cliffs," she whispered. "At dawn." King's pulse pounded in her ears. Dawn. The sun had always been a symbol of warmth, of new beginnings. But now, it carried the weight of an ending. There is still time, the handmaiden pressed. Go to him. The night stretched before her, a path unknown, dangerous, but she had already made her choice. She slipped through the village unseen, her steps guided by desperation and love that would not yield to the chains of tradition. The forest was alive with whispers, the wind carrying secrets only lovers understood. By the river, beneath the silver glow of the moon, Lao stood, his hands now freed, his expression unreadable as his closest friend loosened the final knot. You must leave, the friend urged. Now, before they find you missing. Lao turned, and there she was, standing at the river's edge, her breath unsteady, her eyes alight with something beyond fear. King, he murmured, her name a prayer on his lips. She ran to him, his arms encircling her before reason could catch up to them. There were no words, only the fierce beat of their hearts, a rhythm louder than the river's endless murmur. We must go, she whispered against his chest. And so they ran, through the trees, their feet barely touching the earth, their breaths mingling with the night. Hope burned within them, fragile but defiant, a flickering flame in the darkness. But hope was a cruel thing, for fate had never been kind to lovers who ran. A rustle in the trees, the snap of a branch, then voices. They were not alone. King turned just as warriors emerged, their torches casting fiery halos around them. Her father stood among them, his face carved from stone, his disappointment deeper than any blade. She stepped forward, her hands raised. Please, let us go. There is no place you can go, he said, his voice a sorrowful decree. Not while you bear the name of this clan. Lao's grip tightened around her hand. Then let her go. Let your daughter live the life you have chosen for her. I will leave. I will never return. But the elders had already spoken. The lot had not been for love. The warriors moved forward. Lao pulled King behind him, his stance one of a man who had already accepted the fight before him. She saw it in his eyes. He would fight. He would die for her. No, she cried, stepping between him and the warriors. I will not let you take him. Her father's expression did not change. Then you will share his fate. The words sealed their doom. There was no trial, no further words exchanged. The village had cast its judgment, and so, under the watchful moon, a warrior and a chieftain's daughter met their fate. Bound together, they were led to the cliffs, the place where the sky met the earth, where the river stretched endlessly below. The wind howled, as if the spirits of the land mourned what was to come. King turned to Lao, her fingers tightening around his. They cannot take what is already theirs, she whispered. He understood. Their love did not belong to the village. It did not belong to the laws carved in stone. It belonged to the sky, to the river, to the wind that had carried their whispers across the night. And so, before the hands of men could decide their end, they made the choice that had always been theirs alone. With one final breath, one final look into each other's eyes, they stepped forward. The wind caught them, the river below opening its arms. They did not fall. They soared. The wind carried their names long after their bodies had vanished into the river's embrace. The villagers stood motionless at the edge of the cliffs, torches flickering against the darkness, their eyes fixed on the swirling waters below. No cries of defiance, no final pleas, only the silent choice of two hearts that refused to be parted. For a moment, the world held its breath, as if the very land mourned the loss of what could have been. King's father turned away first. His expression did not waver, his posture did not break, but something in his eyes had dimmed. The laws had been upheld. The village had been protected from disobedience. And yet, as he walked away from the cliffs, he felt the weight of something that could not be named pressing against his chest. The warriors followed in silence, the judgment executed, but their hearts uneasy. The days that followed were eerily quiet. The festival fires had long since burned out, but the air still carried the ghosts of music that no longer played. No one spoke of the lovers, yet their absence was a wound left open. The river, once a place of life, now felt haunted, its endless current whispering their story to those who dared to listen. But the story did not die. It began with the children, the ones who had watched from the shadows, too young to understand the way to tradition, but old enough to recognize something in the way Lao had looked at King. They whispered their names as they played, tracing patterns in the dirt that resembled the river's endless twists and turns. Then it was the women, the ones who had seen King grow from a child into a woman who had dared to love beyond the limits of what was allowed. They spoke of her in hushed tones as they pounded rice, as they wove baskets, as they watched their own daughters and wondered if love should be a choice rather than a burden. And finally, it was the elders, the ones who had once ruled with firm hands and unwavering voices. They did not speak of the past, but in the depths of their eyes, there was something unspoken, a question that had never needed asking before. Had the laws they protected truly kept the village strong, or had they merely ensured that no one would ever dare to dream beyond them? Seasons changed. The river continued its path, indifferent to the sorrows of men, but the village was no longer the same. The festival returned, but something had shifted. When the young warriors danced, they glanced at the women with something new in their eyes. Not just admiration, but a quiet longing for something more. When the elders spoke of duty, there was hesitation in their voices, as if they, too, had begun to wonder. One night, an old man sat by the fire, his fingers tracing lines in the dirt. The children gathered around him, their eyes wide with curiosity. "Tell us of Lao and King," one of them whispered. The old man hesitated. Once, he would have silenced such a question. Once, he would have told them to forget. But now, with the firelight flickering against his worn features, he found he could not deny them the truth. And so, he told their story. He spoke of a warrior with a heart unyielding, a chieftain's daughter who dared to defy fate, a love that had burned brighter than the torches that had once condemned them. He spoke of a river that carried whispers, of the wind that had mourned their passing, of the cliffs that still bore witness to a love that refused to be erased. The children listened, their small hands tracing patterns in the dirt, the same way the river carved its path through the land. The next morning, a woman stood at the edge of the river, her feet sinking into the cool earth. She had never spoken of King aloud, never dared to voice the pain that had lingered in the quiet corners of her heart. But now, as she watched the water move, she whispered her friend's name to the wind, allowing it to carry the sorrow she had kept hidden. She was not the only one. One by one, the villagers returned to the river. Some came with offerings, woven garlands of flowers placed gently upon the water's surface. Others came with silence, with only their thoughts as they traced the river's path with their eyes. But they all came, and so the river became a monument, not of sorrow, but of remembrance. It was said that on certain nights, when the wind was just right and the moon hung low over the water, the sound of laughter could be heard along the riverbanks. Some claimed it was merely the rustling leaves, the call of distant birds, the trickle of water against stone. But others knew better. They knew the river had not forgotten. As time passed, the village changed. The laws remained, but their grip loosened. Conversations that had once been forbidden were now spoken in quiet corners, then in open spaces, then in the presence of those who once would have silenced them. The elders listened, and slowly, new paths were carved into tradition, paths that allowed love to take root where it once had been forbidden. Lao and King never returned, but they were never truly gone. Their love had been condemned, their names spoken in whispers, but in the end, it was their story that endured. For love, like the river, does not yield to the will of men. It carves its own path, whether welcomed or not, shaping the land with each passing season. And those who dare to follow its course may find that even in tragedy, there is something eternal.